So, Ambassador Jacob Lew, thank you so much for being with us. I'll start in the obvious place. The video put out by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and obviously the reaction in Washington. Is that incident behind us?
Well, first, I want to be clear that the U.S. has, since October 7th, been providing an unprecedented amount of military support for Israel at a pace that is, just been very rapid. And I think, as is well known, there was one shipment of large diameter munitions that was put on hold, and there's been conversations going on about the conditions under which they would be delivered. Apart from that, everything that is in the process is in the normal process.
I would imagine that the Biden administration was surprised to see a video like that.
Yeah.
Beyond the issue of the shipment itself, the psychology surrounding it. Do you trust Benjamin Netanyahu?
So I can speak to the facts. I'm not going to try to analyze why the video was released. The fact that really is important is that one shipment was put on hold and everything else continues to go. There is a challenge in keeping up the pace at which the U.S. has delivered munitions, just because we're no longer at the beginning of the process. We're deep into it. And we'll have to work together on a technical level to make sure that we continue to provide things as they're needed. I don't think it was constructive to have this be a public conversation. Look, I think the relationship between the United States and Israel is deep and long, and it has never produced more strength and better results than under the current president. There's nothing that I see that changes the commitment that the president has and the United States has to supporting Israel and helping Israel defend itself. We've had serious questions through the war about different issues, and they've been very public, and we've discussed them. And I actually think it has been constructive, the way we've engaged. We've engaged the way friends engage to make sure that the contours of how the war is being fought meet our common values, and the way things like humanitarian assistance are provided meet our common values. And we haven't been shy about raising those issues. And I think that it's actually been beneficial in terms of the way things have gone.
The relationship with Benjamin Netanyahu personally, would you characterize it as a trusting relationship?
Yeah, I'm really not going to get into the kind of questions of personality the release of the video triggered a reaction that speaks for itself. I think that the question of where we go from here is, how do you maintain the relationship, as I'm confident we will, so that we continue to provide the support that Israel needs, and we have the conversations where we agree and where we have differences, and I'm confident that we're going to continue to be able to do that.
With me in studio to discuss the importance of this is former senior IDF intelligence officer Rafael Yerushalmi. So we know that sometimes the story is not actually the story. The U.S. is denying that there's any reason behind this. Are we looking at a smoke without fire, or is there something to this?
It can go either way. First of all, I'm so happy I'm not a politician and I'm military. I mean, this is a bit ridiculous, this circus around that video and what this one said and the other one said. And what is important is where do we go from there? It seems that there was a need from the Israeli government to point out some kind of a problem in the obtaining of ammunition in time, or the sufficient amount of ammunition. Also, some kinds of ammunition are under discussion that the Americans might not want to give to the Israelis. So I think on the eve of a possible outbreak of war with the Hezbollah, with Lebanon, it's important that things should be well coordinated and things should be very clear, like we should know, the Israelis, on how much support we can count from the Biden administration. We meaning really in quantities of ammunition. Can we count on so much ammunition? Because we might be going into a long term war, where we're going to have to need a lot of equipment to replace some material and a lot of ammunition. So we have to know, and we are coordinating like we did in Gaza. We will coordinate with the Americans whatever we're going to do in Lebanon. So it's important, it should be clear. Now, whether it should have been put out in the public in a spectacular video, or it could not have been discussed maybe in the corridors of power, that's another story. And
Right.
I will just conclude by saying that for sure we couldn't do what we're doing without the Americans, and we have to be very careful to keep their friendship, and especially the friendship of Joe Biden, who is a true friend. Personally, it's not politics, he's sincerely, as a person, a true friend of Israel and the Jewish people, and I don't think this is the tone I would adopt, even though I have a strong request or a strong demand to address him.
All right. Speaking of the situation in Lebanon that you mentioned, it's been escalating recently. Could this be a message from the U.S. Saying we're not going to send you whatever weapons you could need right now, hold off on anything there, finish Gaza first?
Yes, I think that's the leverage. I mean, they did that with Rafah. They said, don't go into Rafah, don't start. Then they said, okay, you can start, but differently from what you planned. And we proved them wrong. We actually proved the Americans wrong about Rafah. And we probably can prove the Americans wrong about Hezbollah and possible war there. They think that it will destabilize the region. I'm not so sure it would destabilize anything. I think nobody wants to get involved in a conflict opposing the IDF and the Hezbollah. Why would the other countries want to be involved? We can also prove them wrong in the strategy that we might adopt, that we might be right in the plans that we have in store in case of a war against Hezbollah, full-fledged war. And in this case, they would rectify, as they did in Gaza, rectify their position, not withhold certain weapons they were threatening to withhold. So we can do it as we move around and we move along. Right now, of course, it's a leverage for the Americans to say, we might not give you everything you need. Would you not obey our advice? So it's an exchange, but it's a true cooperation. One thing is very important, and that we must know, whatever happens, the presence of the Sixth Fleet is guaranteeing us a very good anti-aerial defense. Our aerial defense is not sufficient to face the Hezbollah threat on its own, but the destroyers of the Sixth Fleet in the Mediterranean have equipment that can help us do that.
All right, Rafael Yerushalmi, we will get back to the situation in the north, but I want to start now in Gaza. An elite IDF unit known as Ghost has just wrapped up a raid against a university in central Gaza. The military says it found weapons and barrels packed with explosives at the university, which it claims was used as a Hamas command center. Hamas operatives opened fire at the troops as they entered the area, according to the IDF. Now, earlier today, the IDF also announced that 2 Israeli soldiers were killed in a Hamas mortar attack in the central Gaza Strip. 25-year-old Sergeant First Class Omer Smadja and 27-year-old Sergeant First Class Sadia Yaakov Deri. Another 3 soldiers were seriously wounded in the attack. Meanwhile, heavy fighting in Rafah, in the south of the Strip, continues. IDF tanks are reportedly moving into the western and northern parts of the city. The Palestinian Red Crescent says 18 people were killed and 35 wounded in an Israeli strike on displaced people's tents in Rafah. Israeli forces entered the area of Rafah over 40 days ago and have taken control of the east, south, and center so far. And now to the north. The risk of a full-out war between Israel and Hezbollah is increasing. And while the IDF says it is prepared to fight, others warn that Israel is not prepared for the consequences. The head of the company Noga, which is responsible for planning Israel's electrical systems, came out yesterday and said that Israel is living in a fantasy. He said the company cannot promise electricity if there is a war in the north, and added that after 72 hours without electricity, it will be impossible to live here. The Noga CEO Shaul Goldstein later tried to walk back his comments, saying they were irresponsible, but the message reached millions of worried Israelis. Now, with us live from the north is Balir Sladin, I-24 News correspondent. Balir, we've received a report that Hezbollah has been warning its fighters not to sleep in the headquarters in the area between Syria and Lebanon due to fears of Israeli strikes. Tell us more.
Yes, exactly. Al Sharq Al Awsat, a Saudi newspaper, has issued this report of apparently Hezbollah militants has been told by Hezbollah leadership that they should change their locations frequently because of the continuous airstrikes from the Israeli Air Force on the Syrian territory, where usually the transfer of weapons takes place between Syria and Lebanon, weapons, of course, that come from Iran. Also, they are warning them not to use their cell phones in that area because of Israeli intelligence that can also benefit from that. And even the residents there are right now criticizing Hezbollah's presence there. Again, in that specific territory are the Syrian army or the Syrian regime supporters. So they are also close to Hezbollah, but they are right now, according to the report, also criticizing their presence there because they are suffer from these airstrikes, and even their initial thoughts of renting out their places for Hezbollah militants is not happening right now because they think that this is dangerous for them as well right now.
All right, Balir, you've been covering the escalations in the north for a while for us now. Are you noticing a difference in the atmosphere on the ground from just a few weeks or months ago until now?
Yes, well, I would say that in the past few days, the atmosphere is getting back to quote-unquote normal, the normal tit-for-tat between Israel and Hezbollah, especially after the escalation that we've seen 2 weeks ago, after the assassination of the Nasser commander, the senior commander, Abu Talib. Hezbollah wanted to send a message to Israel to deter Israel not to target these high-level commanders. That's why we've seen this escalation, the 200 plus rockets every single day for 2-3 days in a row, and then after that we're getting back some sort of like the normal situation, the usual tit for tat. Of course, after the speech that Nasrallah gave, there has been some reports of possible Israeli escalation because of that speech, that he threatened to be prepared for a full war with Israel, and of course that 10 minutes video showing very sensitive sites in Israel. But again, the situation in the ground is somewhat normal. The usual tit for tat, targeting a few military sites on the northern communities, and also Israel targeting the southern towns in Lebanon.
All right, Balir Sladin with us from northern Israel. Thank you for that update and stay safe. Now, still with me in studio is former senior IDF intelligence officer, Rafael Yerushalmi. Now, military analysts are saying on repeat almost that a war with Hezbollah is increasingly unavoidable. But the fighting power and the military capabilities of Hezbollah are at a different level than what we've been seeing, at least in this past year. How worried should Israelis be?
You should be very worried. You're talking about if the Hamas is a knife, then the Hezbollah is a sword. And I would say it's 20-fold in power if we compare the power of Hamas to the one of Hezbollah. So we're worried we should be. The problem is that right now the Hezbollah has Israel where it wants it to be. This long-drawn war of attrition, and that's exactly what the Hezbollah wants. It's playing in its favor, and it's playing against Israel. It's having a very serious impact on our economy. It's having a psychological impact on the civilian population. It's having a physical impact on all those who have been evacuated from their homes for weeks. And it will depleting our ammunitions and tiring our troops, our reservists. So all this attrition, all this long-drawn fighting, what the reporter called tit for tat, that's exactly what the Hezbollah wants. And they will carry that for weeks and months if they need be. They do not have to run a country, an economy, a society. They're a terrorist organization. They do what they want. Here in Israel, time is playing against us. time is playing in this favor, and the more we wait, the more the threat is dangerous, important, and will be difficult to tackle. So really time is against us. If we want to strike, we decide to strike, we should have stricken already a while ago. It's going to be already too late, but we can still do it. We have to strike now. I mentioned the fact that there is an American presence in the Mediterranean. I mentioned that we're already, with our reservists called up, and our war and in our economy, in a war mode. So everything is in place. Why just now not do it and wait? And what will happen? The Hezbollah will just disappear, go away? No, it will not go away. A few years ago, the Hezbollah didn't even have 100,000 missiles. Now they've got over 150,000. So next year and the year after, if we wait, it will be even worse. This morning, there was again an attempt of infiltration from South Lebanon into Israel that was stopped, meaning they're preparing also a 7th of October. We cannot wait. We have to tackle the problem. I do not see what it will bring us to wait, unless there is a miracle diplomatic solution that unfortunately seems la la land today.
All right, Rafael Yerushalmi, thank you for that worrying, concerning update. We move now to the West Bank city of Qalqilia. 2 Palestinians were killed a short while ago. According to the IDF, they were members of the Islamic Jihad terror group, and one of them was planning to carry out a terrorist attack in the area. And joining a current international trend, Armenia is now announcing that it is recognizing the state of Palestine. On their webpage, the foreign ministry states that the, quote, catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza, end quote, is the reason for the decision. It says a 2-state solution is the only way to ensure that both Israelis and Palestinians can realize their aspirations. Armenia also calls for an immediate ceasefire and the release of the hostages. At the moment, 120 Israeli hostages are believed to still be held in Gaza. Israel's foreign ministry summoned the Armenian ambassador for a reprimand. And staying in the international arena, we are exactly 1 week away from the first presidential debate on CNN between U.S. President Joe Biden and the former President Donald Trump. Big day. Jeff Zeleny takes a look at how this debate could compare to those in 2020 and the issues that will likely be on display. Good evening. I'm Bianca Zanini, and this is I-24 News with the latest updates from Israel and the Middle East. We begin with Gaza and a very loose idea by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for what it could look like after the war. Sustained demilitarization, de-radicalization, and an inter-Arab sponsorship. These are some of the key points. Now, the premier has long been criticized for not presenting an actual plan for the future of the enclave. But in an interview with a Washington-based news site, Punchbowl, Netanyahu shared some ideas, including that the Palestinians must learn a, quote, different future than the one of annihilating Israel, an effort he believes should be led by the international community. Now, in that same interview, the Israeli Prime Minister also defended his recent public criticism of the U.S. administration as absolutely necessary. He said he had tried to resolve the issue privately for months before going public. And earlier this week, in a controversial video, Netanyahu blamed the U.S. for stalling weapons shipments from the U.S. to Israel. The Biden administration reacted strongly to the video. Now, with me in studio to discuss this is Mark Schulman, editor-in-chief at History Central and a columnist for Newsweek. Now, Mark, we know that the story is not always the story. The U.S. is denying that there was a reason behind this. Is there perhaps smoke without fire, or is there something
There's a
more?
teeny fire, but it's mostly smoke. Let's keep in mind something at the very beginning. Defense Minister Gallant was scheduled, and I think is still going to Washington either tomorrow or Sunday to meet with Defense Department officials. So any issues that might exist in the area of arms shipment would clearly be taken care of by Gallant or worked on by Gallant. There was absolutely no reason for the public statement. I've heard some rumors that there may be arms slowing down. I don't really know if that's true. We certainly don't need additional arms to finish in Gaza. I mean, the statement he made today was completely ridiculous. I mean, we need big 2,000-pound bombs at this point in the Gaza war? Absolutely not. So that's just a smoke screen. Look, Netanyahu is in a place right now where for 4 months he was promising, we go to Rafah, We finish the war will be over as soon as we finish with Rafah.
Right.
The army is saying it's another week, 2 weeks maximum till we finish with Rafah. Clearly, the war is not going to be over when we finish Rafah. So we need a scapegoat at this point, and I think he's using the Americans as a scapegoat. I don't think it's going to work very well. He's used other
That
scapegoats.
sounds risky at this point.
It's more than risky. It's insane from Israel's standpoint. He's taking a very dangerous path. I mean, you can make the argument that he's going with, let me go with Trump. Okay, I'll take an outside chance that Trump will become president, and here I'm going to be doing
Still
so.
risky.
It's incredibly risky because leaving aside whether Trump is going to be elected or not, he will not take office until the end of January. I mean, the president of the United States is Joseph Biden until January 20th. We needed America between now and January 20th. So undermining the current president and creating an enemy of the current president makes no sense whatsoever.
Right. So you're talking about Netanyahu's possible motives here. What about the U.S.? Could they be sending a message with this delay, reminding the Israelis to hold off on the north?
I think there's something to that, obviously. Look, the 2,000-pound bombs were originally stopped because of the destruction they were causing to homes in Gaza, and the United States was saying that Israel shouldn't use these big bombs anymore, and it was together with another shipment of other bombs. I understand a ship full of American arms left the United States a couple of days ago heading for Israel. Ships carry an awful lot of arms in them. But yes, the United States does not want Israel to take action right now in Lebanon because it's asking the same question it asked about Gaza. What is your strategic plan for what's going to happen?
Right.
And Israel is not really able to give a good plan. It's going to win the war. Well, what does that mean? And again, the same problem we have in Gaza. And the United States does not want a wider war. I mean, you can make the argument that Biden doesn't want a wider war before the election. And sure, that's absolutely true. No president of the United States wants to be dealing with wars. He already has a war in Ukraine. He's had this war. He doesn't need another headache before the November elections. But besides that, the United States, the only way we're going to win that war, quote unquote, is we have to destroy Lebanon. Lebanon is a semi-ally of the United States in some forms. The United States gives aid to Lebanon.
Hezbollah.
Well, Hezbollah is part of Lebanon. It gets complicated.
But it's not the same.
It's not exactly the same. And so you have to say, the United States wants to say, Israel's not been listening to us so much. So, okay, we'll give them a little sign. We'll send the arms a little bit slower. But let's keep in mind the fact, it's not like we don't have any arms. It's not like we don't make any arms. And on top of everything else, if anyone remembers, at the very beginning of the war, Prime Minister Netanyahu said we have to have a major effort to start building explosives here in Israel. There's a worldwide shortage of explosives caused by the Ukrainian war. I don't know about you. I've heard nothing in the 8 months since then of us doing anything to make us more independent in that area. 8 months is a relatively reasonable amount of time for a high-tech country like us to overcome some of these problems. And so we're stuck. We're reliant on the United States much more than we ever were in any war before. And we have to realize that. And if that's the case, we have to listen a little bit. And unfortunate. I mean, and not that I'm against the policy, but we should be free to do whatever we want because we're a sovereign state, but that's not the real world.
Right, and Netanyahu really presented this as him taking care of Israel's interests. Do you think that that's the case?
No, I don't think he's taking care of his. He's taking care of his own personal political interests at this point. I don't see how this works to Israel's interest. Keep in mind the fact that Dermer is in Washington right now, together with Hanegbi, the National Security Advisor, and the Minister for Special Affairs. And then on top of which, like I said, Gallant, the defense minister, is going to Washington in the next couple of days. These are the people who will be able to take care of this more than anything else. Things like this are always done privately. They're not done publicly. On top of everything else, by quoting what Anthony Blinken, Secretary of State, said to him in a private discussion, that's something that's not done. So there is no possible reason for him to do this other than, like I said, trying a long ball to Trump and somehow hoping that's going to work, or B, the United States responsible. I'm not responsible. Rafah didn't succeed because we didn't get the arms we need. But obviously, when our problem in Rafah is not that we're not capturing it. We're getting all of Rafah, taking a little bit longer. We're getting all of Rafah.
Right.
But the problem is that once we get Rafah, everyone who was in Rafah went to Khan Yunis, so went to the central camps, or went somewhere else.
And the problem is also what happens the day after the
We have no plan. I wrote, before we even went into the ground operation, I said, we need a plan for the day after. War.
Right. More and more voices are saying
Well, okay, but it's 8 months later. It's impossible we don't have a plan for war the day after. The fact that Netanyahu came up with some sort of ridiculous idea of something that could be 8 months in 8 months plus is an absurdity. I mean, the Ministry of Defense has been asking since the second month of the war, desperately, where do you want us to go? What's going to take over when we leave? If you don't have something to take over when you leave, you're going to lose. I mean, look, war is an extension of politics by another means. There's the politics side. Without the politics side, you can't win a war.
Right.
And this is what's a tragedy here. We've won the war on the ground. Our soldiers have given their lives. They fought valiantly. We can outfight.
They're still fighting.
They're fighting every day, and we can outfight Hamas without a problem. However, unless we have 500,000 troops that can occupy all of Gaza at one time, maybe that way we could finally finish up with Hamas. We don't have 500,000 troops in our army. We can't do it.
All right, Mark Schulman, thank you very much for your input. And staying in Gaza, an elite IDF unit known as Ghost has just wrapped up a raid against a university in central Gaza. The military says it found weapons and barrels packed with explosives at the university, which it claims was used as a Hamas command center. Now, Hamas operatives opened fire at the troops as they entered the area, according to the IDF. Earlier today, the IDF announced that 2 Israeli soldiers were killed in a Hamas mortar attack in the central Gaza Strip. 25-year-old Sergeant First Class Omer Smadja and 27-year-old Sergeant First Class Sadia Yaakov Deri. Another 3 soldiers were seriously wounded in the attack. And meanwhile, heavy fighting in Rafah in the south of the Strip continues. IDF tanks are reportedly moving into the western and northern parts of the city. The Palestinian Red Crescent says 18 people were killed and 35 wounded in an Israeli strike on displaced people's tents in Rafah. Israeli forces entered the area over 40 days ago and have taken control of the east, south, and center so far. Now, the escalating tensions between Israel and Lebanon in the north are fueling local, regional, and international fears. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres now says he is profoundly concerned by the situation and that UN peacekeepers are working to calm the situation and prevent any miscalculation.
I felt compelled today to voice my profound concerns about escalation between Israel and Hezbollah along the blue line. Escalation in continued exchanges of fire and escalation in bellicose rhetoric from both sides, as if an all-out war was imminent. The risk for the conflict in the Middle East to widen is real and must be avoided. One rash move, one miscalculation, could trigger a catastrophe that goes far beyond the border and, frankly, beyond imagination. Let's be clear. The people of the region and the people of the world cannot afford Lebanon to become another Gaza.
Not prepared for the consequences. The head of the company responsible for planning Israel's electrical systems is saying they cannot promise electricity if there's a war in the north, and that after just 72 hours without electricity, it will be impossible to live here. And U.S. officials also warned this week that at least some of Israel's Iron Dome air defense systems could be overwhelmed by incoming Hezbollah attacks. The warnings are worrying Israelis across the country. Now with us live from the north is Balir Sladin, I-24 News correspondent. Balir, we've received a report that Hezbollah has been warning its fighters not to sleep in the headquarters in the area between Syria and Lebanon due to fear of Israeli strikes. Tell us more.
Yes, Al-Sharq Al-Awsat newspaper, Saudi newspaper, issued this report saying that Hezbollah's leaders has given orders to the militants on the ground to stay away from the headquarters in the Syrian territory where the transfer of weapons takes place from Iran, of course, to Syria and then to Lebanon. They are also saying that they are asking them to change their location frequently, not to sleep in the cars and other places that can be targeted by the Israeli airstrikes, and also not using their phones even between the locations, so the Israeli intelligence can't detect their location and then target them. This is happening after a few strikes in that area since, of course, this exchange of fire started, but has escalated recently, and even Iranian troops or Iranian soldiers or militants militants, if we can call them this way, has been killed also in these airstrikes recently, at least 2 of them a couple of weeks ago. So this is a warning to the militants on the ground, and they are even now bothering the residents there, the Syrian residents there that are very close to the regime, very close to Hezbollah as well, but they are finding it very dangerous for these Hezbollah militants to be there as well.
All right, Balir, you've been covering the escalations in the north on the ground for a while now for us. Are you noticing a difference in the atmosphere on the ground from a few days ago, a few weeks ago with this escalation?
Well, definitely. I would say that it has been relatively quiet this day, specifically in the past couple of hours. We haven't heard any sirens, any attacks even from Hezbollah. There has been a few attacks from the Israeli Air Force on the southern cities or towns in Lebanon, specifically on El Khiyam and also Maisi Jabal. So towns that are very close to the border. We're not even talking about any airstrikes that are very heavy airstrikes or something that can escalate the situation. So we're saying that the two sides are getting back to the normal tit-for-tat between each other. We've heard also what the Prime Minister said today, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, to an American news site. He said that the Israeli plan is first to win in Gaza and then to not go for a war or to prevent a war in the north. So it's not the Israeli plan to open a war here. So if the situation keeps this way, of course, this is very unacceptable for the residents in the north, and this is not something that Israel can live with. But at least this situation can continue for even weeks and months from now. But again, everything can change in any mistake that could be taken by any of the sides here.
All right, Balir Sladin, tit for tat of rockets being the new normal. It's very concerning. Thank you for your time. Stay safe. Now, joining me from Washington, D.C. to discuss this further is David Daoud, a Hezbollah and Lebanon Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. David, thank you for being with us. I've been speaking with military and security analysts, and they all seem to give the similar answer that a war with Hezbollah has to happen. Would you agree with that interpretation? And if yes, how worried should Israelis be?
I think, unfortunately, they are correct. The war between Israel and Hezbollah is not a matter of when. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. It is inevitable. And if a ceasefire deal is achieved in the north now, the conditions that we've seen from the French and the Americans don't solve the underlying cause of the problem, which is Hezbollah's undying enmity towards Israel. What this means is that you'll have a freeze in place of forces. Hezbollah will continue its activity across the border, its preparations for a future war. This may happen, in 5 years, in 10 years, but at a time of Hezbollah's choosing, when the organization is far more lethal and far more able to inflict harm upon Israel.
All right, so Iran came out just a couple of hours ago or less even saying that Hezbollah can defend itself against Israel and it can defend Lebanon. But can Israel keep its population safe in a war with Hezbollah?
Look, I think, first of all, it's a very strange thing for the Iranian delegation to be speaking about Lebanese issues, which should really speak to Hezbollah's identity and its leanings, and that Iran is now looking at Lebanon as basically as an extension of itself. We also have to distinguish between the bluster and the reality. Hezbollah is a very lethal force. It's a very capable force. But the IDF is a far more powerful conventional army. It can bear a lot more firepower on Hezbollah. And at the same time, this does not mean that Hezbollah cannot inflict a great deal of pain upon Israel, upon its infrastructure, upon its residents in the north, and even deeper with its longer range missiles. Yes, I think Israel is capable of defending its citizens if it is given the proper support by the United States, and that's diplomatic support and military support.
Right. All right, David Daoud, Hezbollah and Lebanon Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Thank you for that update, for your input. And although it was very worrying, it does seem that there is an agreement that this is the direction that Israel and Hezbollah are going in. And we move now to the West Bank in the city of Qalqilia, where 2 Palestinians were killed just a short while ago. According to the IDF, they were members of the Islamic Jihad terror group, and one of them was planning to carry out a terrorist attack in the area. Internationally, joining a current growing trend, Armenia is now announcing that it is recognizing the state of Palestine. On their webpage, the foreign ministry states that the, quote, catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza is the reason for the decision. It says a two-state solution is the only way to ensure that both Israelis and Palestinians can realize their aspirations. Armenia also calls for an immediate ceasefire and the release of the hostages. At the moment, 120 Israeli hostages are believed to still be held in Gaza. Israel's foreign ministry summoned the Armenian ambassador for a reprimand. Now, we're exactly 1 week away from the first presidential debate on CNN between U.S. President Joe Biden and the former President Donald Trump. Jeff Zeleny takes a look at how this debate could compare to those in 2020 and the issues that will likely be on display.
The historic rematch between Joe Biden and Donald Trump is anything but a rerun. A vastly different set of issues are driving this race as the president and former president come face to face for their first debate of the 2024 campaign. 4 years since they shared a stage.
You're the worst president America has
Thousands of residents of northern Israel have evacuated from their homes since the war broke out in October, a war started by Hamas in the south, Hezbollah in southern Lebanon showing its support for Hamas with regular rocket and drone attacks towards northern Israel, including yet another major barrage towards Kiryat Shmona earlier in the day. So let's find out more about life for people who are living in the north right now. We welcome Haley Levinsky, a business owner and resident of the north. She joins us from Kfar Blum, a kibbutz close to Kiryat Shmona. Haley, thank you so much. We so appreciate your time. It's more than 8 months, regular rocket and drone strikes towards northern communities, as you well know. So from your vantage point, what did you see and hear when Hezbollah targeted Kiryat Shmona yet again today?
Wow, it's amazing. It's like every morning or afternoon, you hear the rockets going off, you hear the Iron Dome going off, and put your head out the window and you see the rockets being targeted, you see falls. This morning I was driving, coming back north, I could see the rockets falling on Kiryat Shmona. It's pretty scary. It's a strange reality.
It's a strange reality and increasing regularity that you're dealing with this. What do? Do you have a